unmute. So in March of 2020, I was already in the process of interviews with the search committee for Gracefield Christian Camp and Retreat Center when our province, at the time I was living in Ontario, but also our nation and most of the world shut down for 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And here we are 2 years later. And we have experienced many barriers throughout these past 2 years to building community and being part of community. And sometimes these days, fostering a sense of community can feel a lot like pushing a large boulder up a hill. And although these things have been accelerated in the past 2 years, that's not where it started. We were headed down this road long before we ever heard of COVID-19. And this process of scattering community started well before the pandemic. And also in 2020, Netflix released a series, a documentary called The Last Blockbuster. And in that documentary, they basically chronicle the goings-on of the very last blockbuster in the United States of America. It starts off, there's actually two, and they're kind of racing to see which one will fold last, right? Because nobody rents movies anymore. I think back to my younger days in my 20s. I used to go to a video store. It wasn't a Blockbuster. The town I lived in at the time was much too small to have a Blockbuster franchise, but the guy who ran the video store was Kelly Croker. And I had a relationship with Kelly. When I walked into the video store and there was a new movie that Kelly thought I would like, he would tell me about it. He would introduce me to things that were maybe a little bit outside of my normal comfort zone, but there was relationship in that transaction. Whereas now we rely on an algorithm to tell us what we want to watch next. Cell phones have also been something that have changed how we interact with people. We used to call places. Now we call people. When I was a teenager, and a child, I would have to talk to my friend Paul's mom before I could talk to Paul. And it was particularly traumatic because Paul Perry's mother would make me say the magic words in order to get to talk to Paul. Those magic words were, "I love you." So it was much harder on Paul than it was on me, but I always had to tell Mrs. Perry that I loved her before she would let me talk to her son. But it was about relationship. We got to know how to talk to people, how to interact with people, and even how to have a laugh that will last decades later. As every time I see her, I remind her, but I don't have to remind her because she still makes me say it. I'll seek counseling later, don't worry. David Spangler is an American spiritual philosopher, and he has said, "Some people think they are in community, but they are only in proximity. True community requires commitment and openness, and it is a willingness to extend yourself to encounter and know the other." So the picture I see is that in order to combat the scattering of community, we need to extend ourselves. We need to reach out towards others, which requires us to care about others. If we want to show that we care about others, the best way to do this is to encourage them. There is no doubt that Paul's letter to the Roman church was a way for him to encourage them in spite of the fact that they were not able to be together in person. As we heard in our New Testament reading, Paul breaks down the reasons why he longs to be with them. He pours out his heart in the opening parts of this letter. In verses 8, 9, and 10, he talks about how thankful he is for the people. And he's praying for them regularly. He's never met these people, right? He just said he longs to be there. He hasn't been there. During COVID, my small group Bible study, we prayed for a gentleman out on Vancouver Island suffering with COVID, Jimmy Kim. I've never met him. We prayed fervently for Jimmy that God would heal him, and God did. But praying for people that we've never even met and might never cross paths with is something that I think Paul models here. Verse 11 and 12, he talks about a longing for community and a longing for encouragement. That's what people wanted before COVID, right? This is what people were lacking for decades, is a community that will come alongside and encourage. Verses 13, 14, and 15, he talks about prayers going unanswered. He wants to be there in Rome with the Roman church, but his desire and his prayers have, to this point, not resulted in him being able to go. In verse 16 and 17, he talks about the foundation of faith, and that the faith that Paul talks about here is the fuel that drives the engine of the community that he desires to be part of. It's the faith that keeps him praying and is the encouragement of the faith of others that is at the heart of his longing. And it is the reports of their faith that fuel his thankfulness. Paul's led by thankfulness for the church in Rome. His thankfulness is what fuels the gratitude he expresses to God for them and motivates his heart to pray for them earnestly. I did a Google search to see why being thankful is important. One of the results in particular stood out to me. It was based on research from the Positive Psychology Research Department from Harvard University. Side note on that, the fact that there is a positive psychology research department at Harvard University does frighten me a little bit, because it would lead me to believe that there is a negative psychology research department that I don't want any part of. But it said that gratitude is strongly and consistently associated with greater happiness. Gratitude helps people feel more positive emotions, relish good experiences, improve their health, deal with adversity, and build strong relationships. The Oxford Dictionary defines thankfulness as the feeling of being grateful. So the way that I see this is that just feeling something and keeping it to myself does not do my community any good, while expressing and showing my gratitude to others in word or in my deeds or in my prayers is what connects others to community. We start to turn our attention from being me-centered to being outward and upward facing. And that reflects God's love out to our community. Many of us over the past 2 years can relate to having plans for travel disrupted or changed. As we had to do, Paul makes do with the technology that was at his disposal to send his words to Rome. Since he can't be there in person, he clearly, but he is pretty clear in this letter that the letter is not sufficient to replace his presence, and that he will come so that they can mutually encourage each other by faith. The beautiful thing about Paul's situation is that while he is frustrated by being unable to travel, this letter to the Romans may never have existed in its current form if his earlier attempts to travel had been successful. So how does that relate to me up at Gracefield or to you here working in Westboro at Westminster Presbyterian Church. I think we now need to have an eagerness for deepening relationships with community, with people around us. It's amazing where you can meet somebody these days. We can potentially cross paths with somebody at a grocery store, and to have an eye and a heart for seeking the people that God is putting in front of us. I am eager for the deepening of relationships with the community of people who spend time at Gracefield each year, both with those who come for a day and those who come for a whole summer. I'm excited to see growth and development and leadership skills in our summer staff. I am eager for our 60th anniversary celebrations and to continue the work that we have been doing to build our programming for all ages to be able to facilitate growth in our community members and our partner organizations. I'm excited to implement the communications tools that we have been working on to spread the news about this place in creation where people can come and be connected back to the Creator. If it's not too tacky for me to mention here in a message at a church, I'm excited about the financial position of the camp right now. That hasn't always been the case, but right now we are in a good financial position. We appreciate so much the donations that so many people have made over the years, and are thankful that God has been multiplying those donations and enabling us to continue the work. I also share Paul's eagerness to preach. And I'm so excited for a few weeks from now when we'll be able to gather together again at the chapel by the lake on a Sunday morning. When I was growing up back home in Shawville, the minister of our church had a children's program called Cornerstone. And in that Cornerstone program, there were 4 building blocks. I'm not going to go through them all, probably because I don't actually remember all of them perfectly, and I don't want Reverend McKeag to see this on Zoom and be disappointed in me. But the one that stands out is that God loves us and has a wonderful plan for our lives. It was drilled into my brain as a child growing up. And it may seem simplistic to some, but is what puts the good in the good news. It is the message that God sent through Jeremiah in the Old Testament reading. It's the message that Jesus brought. When the people thought the Messiah was coming to wage war, it's the message that Paul had for the early Christians when they faced the real possibility of facing trouble because they believed Jesus. And it's still the message for us today as we face the loneliness and seclusion that continue to grow in a divided society. God loves you. He has plans to prosper, not to harm, to give you hope, to give you a future. Plans to listen, plans to be found, and plans to gather scattered communities.